So we got the Firebase admin and the Firebase functions package available here in this functions folder for our JavaScript code to interact with. So this is now really all just JavaScript world. Has nothing to do with Flutter because this functions code will later run on one of Firebase's servers so that in the end we can run some code there when something changes in the database, for example. So how could this function now look like? If we dive into the official Firebase docs, which is always a great idea for that. So if you search for Firebase Cloud Functions, you find of course plenty of documentation. And what you will find here under trigger background functions is that you can use Cloud Firestore triggers so that you can basically run a function as a response to some event that happened in your Cloud Firestore database. And as you can see, there are other triggers as well. You could also run a function because some file was uploaded, for example, with cloud storage triggers. But I care about a function that I want to run because something changed in the database. And here we got 4 triggers: on create, on update, on delete, and on write. On write runs whenever on create, on update, or delete is triggered, and the other triggers only run for the respective operation. Since I want to run some code whenever a new message is stored, so whenever a new message was sent, I'm interested in the onCreate trigger. And you can see how that works in the examples below. In the end, we need to import this Firebase functions package into our code file with this line of code. This is already happening here at the very top. And thereafter, we need to export such a function here, which is set up with functions.firestore, then .document, and then a path to the document to which you want to listen, so where you want to listen to the create event, and then on write, or in our case on create. So I will copy this code here and move it here into my function code like this, and replace this with on create. And here the path is a different one. I'm interested in the chat collection, but there in any message. Now you can name this however you want, but you need the curly braces to signal to Firebase that this is a placeholder, that you don't know the exact document ID, but that instead you care about any document in there. So whenever a new document is added, no matter which ID it has, this onCreate function should run. That is what we're writing here. And that means that, whenever something new is added in our chat collection, whenever a new document is added here, so whenever a new message is added, our function will run. So maybe to see how that works, let's just console log, which is the JavaScript equivalent to print in Flutter. Let's just console log the data we're getting upon this event. And the data we are getting is described down there. You can get the data after the operation completed, so after the creation of the document finished, with change after data, as you can learn here. And this is all just JavaScript code, in case you're wondering what it is. As you can see, it's not too far away from Flutter, but for example, const works differently, so don't be confused about that. It's all JavaScript code here. So I'm interested in the data after the write finished, so I will copy this change.after.data function call here and log the result here with console log. So I have passed the value that is returned by calling data to console log so that we can output it here. So now that we've finished writing this function, we have to deploy it, which means we have to upload it to Firebase servers, because it's not going to run on our local machine, it's going to run on Firebase servers. So here in your project where you previously ran Firebase init, now run Firebase deploy. And this will take your function and upload it and initialize it to and on Firebase servers. So you can see this process here. It can take a couple of seconds and it will let you know once it's finished. Now what you actually see is that I'm getting an error here, a 403 unknown error. Now 403 looks like I was denied access. So you can try running Firebase login if you're getting this. And thereafter I reran Firebase deploy, and now this looks better. Looks like it's being uploaded. And with the deploy complete message, it, guess what, completed. So now our function is running on Firebase servers, and now whenever we have a new message in the database, the function should trigger there. Now to monitor our function and its output, in our Firebase web console, we can go back to functions and reload this page. And you should see your function here. If you don't see it immediately, wait a few minutes and then try reloading. So that should be your function. And you can also view the logs of this function to see what's going on there. Now, as always, by the way, when you're working with Firebase features, check their pricing. For example, here in the case of Cloud Functions, you got a certain free tier, a certain free usage amount, and if you exceed that, you would be charged. So make sure you check that. So here we see some logs from this function now, and now let's see if something changes there if I send a new message. Does this work? If I send this message, it shows up here, of course, and it should show up in our database. There, if we have a look at the chat collection, we should see this does this work message here. And what about our function? Now, the logs can always take some time until they update, so you might want to reload, wait a bit, and come back at a later point of time. But eventually, you should see something here. And I actually do see something. I see an error. Cannot read property data of undefined. So our function executed, but something went wrong there. We were not able to retrieve some data here. So it looks like calling data on change.after did not work. Now this was simply a little mistake from my side. In the onCreate case, we actually don't have to do this change after thing. Instead, we get a snapshot of the data anyways. So we can just call snapshot.data. As you can see here, I was in the onUpdate case, where you of course have two states, before and after the update. But if you create something, you just have this snapshot. So I decided to leave this in because this is easy to overlook. And therefore, now if we access the snapshot here, we should be able to really get the data we're interested in. So just to double check this, let's redeploy this. Whenever you make a change locally, you have to redeploy. So let's redeploy this, and let's now validate this again. So let's wait for the redeployment to finish. And now that it finished, let me send another message. Like that. And let's then go back to our logs here. And again, you might want to reload here, wait a little bit, reload again until the new log shows up here. And eventually you should get your data. Now we still have a warning here, or an error. We'll take care about this later. But what we see here is this piece of data. So we see that's the data we got, and that's exactly the data that was stored in the database. So we got our username here, we got the text. That is pretty cool. And that's the data which I now want to send as part of my notification. Now, one extra note, we also see that we got an error that the function returned undefined and that it should return a value or a promise instead. A promise is essentially the same as a future in Dart. So in JavaScript, that's called a promise. And our function does neither. Now, that's not a huge problem. We can simply return anything here at the moment. This will soon change anyways, because now, of course, I don't want to return anything. Instead, now I want to send my message. And for this, we'll use that Firebase admin SDK, which we also have.